Hey, Buddy Manning here. Welcome to a new edition of the Garden Report Friday edition between games two and three here. Welcome back another member of the Chase Down podcast. Justin helped us preview the series. Now Carter's here to talk about a Cavaliers win.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we save the fun pod for me. Justin gets top billing. I get it. He's a star. I love him. But when it's time to talk about a little Cavalier shot in Freuda, I'm happy to join in. It's always great talking to you, Bobby.
It was a long night in Boston. It was ugly. I would put it up there with probably the worst performance I've seen from this group, just considering the circumstances. Cavs down a couple starters here, 25-point blowout in game one. You come into a game two, 25 or 12-point favorites, not quite 25, but it felt that way. And you end up down by 29 points in this game in the fourth quarter. I mean, it looked like game 6 of the finals in some ways, where the Warriors were just running them off the court. I don't
And
want to go overboard with this, but as much as you're probably looking at Boston and saying like, "Oh, everybody's overreacting. Celtics are still in a good spot here. It's just 1-1." This is bad. And, the Cavs should take some, satisfaction in this win here. And they have a long way to go. Like talking to Tristan and some of their guys in the locker room, like they're like, "Yeah, these guys are going to bounce back." But man, this was bad. This was really bad. This wasn't even that game 2 against the Heat where the Heat hit a million threes and just rode that to a win. The Cavs just outwilled the Celtics in this one.
yeah, it was pretty shocking to be honest, especially given the way the game starts. It's another 9-2 run and Boston kind of completely has the Cavs in their clutches. And I'm like, man, is this going to be a sweep? Like it just felt so soft. To me, the first 6 minutes of the game, I was like, uh oh. Not only did we not solve things, Joe solved some stuff from game one when they already had played pretty well. And then, for whatever reason, it was, I think the Celtics going to their bench, going to the Hauser Cornette minutes, like I think the Cavs just were able to settle themselves down a little bit. They stopped looking so outmanned and outpressed. They started staying home a little bit better and not overreacting, not overhelping, and they just kind of started putting the clamps on. And this team, no matter how much shooting they've added, no matter how their personnel has changed, like they are really fueled by their defense. Like the team looks the most overwhelming when they're stringing together stops and baiting teams into bad offense. And that's exactly what they did. It was, I mean, a stunning result. Frankly, I mean, this is a team that JB I think had been outscored by an average of 20 points on the road in his 8-game playoff career in road games up to this point. And all the road games in Orlando were pretty ugly. All the road games in New York last year were pretty ugly. So, man, it was a stunner. I mean, there's a reason it was the biggest win by a double digit underdog since like 1991. Because it felt monumentous.
Yeah, and I think JB was the big winner. He came out with a great game plan here, and I remember him after game one being like, "This is going to be a long series." I know some Celtics fans were laughing at that after that game and saying, "We got Tatum held up, but we got to get out to those other guys too." And it's one of those things where you say you're going to do it, but it's tougher to actually practice because you could have imagined them shifting their focus from Tatum to the Whites and Browns of the world, and then Tatum going off at that point, but they held everybody down effectively in this game. Horford hit some shots early. I think he started 3 or 4 from 3. They were clearly shying away from him, but he didn't end up hurting them. And the staggering number in this game that really makes it one of the all-time defensive performances I think I've seen is 77% from ESPN of the Celtics threes were heavily contested in this game. And they, of course, outshot, in terms of total three-point attempts, the Cavs here, but they couldn't hit them. And Cavs did a great job converting theirs. getting to the rim early, you saw it. They wanted to involve Mobley. They wanted to get the ball in his hands. They wanted to get him comfortable out there because it had been rough for him in game one. And I didn't know how he was going to be able to get it going, but they just made such a concerted effort to find him. And, the big thing at shoot around going into game two, Carter, was they were like, we shot 80% at the rim in game one. I was like, oh, all right. So they go back there again and again and again, and they just took advantage of the Celtics, whether it was Horford in there, Cornette, they certainly took advantage of. And then they tried to go to Tillman, and that really didn't work either, but more for offensive reasons, I felt like. So it was a great game plan. JB, I'm sure he's received plenty of criticism on the Cleveland side, but this was a good one. This was a big one for him.
Yeah, I mean, and like I do think the threes are going to just be the story of the series. And I thought one great bellwether for the Cavs in Game One, other than their rim scoring, was that they actually outperformed Boston on generating wide open threes. They got 19 threes in Game One. I think they hit 8 of them. Boston only got 17 wide open threes, and then in Game Two, down to 12. This is one of the best teams in the league at generating those wide open threes. I think they averaged 19 a game. So the Cavs holding them to 12. And then the other big change from game one to game two is game one is an outlier on these kind of somewhat contested shots. Boston goes 9 of 22, which is, outlandishly good for that level of closeout. And then in game two, guess what? They go 2 of 15. So not only were the Cavs did numbers kind of normalized, maybe a little too far the other way for the Cavs. Obviously, you're not going to expect Boston to shoot that poorly, even when they're somewhat guarded. But I just think they're winning the numbers game, to go from 22 some semi-open threes to 15 and 17 wide open threes to 12. That just tells me that their game plan discipline was really, really good. And something that I think is really important to shout out with regards to the Cavs defensive effort in this game was that, I think they have some really hard challenges because, it's very easy to say when you're playing the Boston Celtics, stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home. They don't like to shoot at the rim, so you just don't help. And the reality is, especially this version of the Cavs that's missing so much positional size in Dean Wade and Jared Allen, staying home means a layup line. And there were times where, in game one, Jaylen Brown had that absolute yam on Isaac Okoro because it's like no one came and helped, and he got an easy bucket as a result. Derek White got a few easy buckets like that in game one. So you can't just say that. You can't be that orthodox. And the answer really is you just need to execute really, really well. And I thought the Cavs players executed their game plan damn near perfectly in that game where, they were taking that one step to shade and mess up what the ball handler was doing, but not that 2 steps where then they can kick it to the opposite corner and generate one of those wide open threes and get things going. So I just thought not only was their game plan really good, I thought their game discipline was really good because the reality is I think their personnel right now kind of requires them to have perfect game plan discipline.
Absolutely, especially when you probably need to tighten things up a little bit and, lean on some of the starting guys a little more. You went to the Sam Merrills and, George Niang's at certain points, and it's just not going to work here. You got to
No, they're too good.
lean on Mitchell. You got to lean on Garland, and Garland was much better in this game. Mobley much better. LeVert much better, and you just got those stacked performances that you needed, and got more of them than the Celtics here. And the big thing's Tatum right now, obviously. It's baffling. It really is where he's at
It's
right now.
interesting that you say that because it's funny. I'm watching this series and I'm like, I don't think Tatum's playing terribly poorly. I think I don't know. Maybe these are wine and cold gold colored glasses, but I just think he's being guarded by really great defenders. Isaac Okoro is one of the best point of attack defenders in the NBA, and he's getting under him. And again, the Cavs are shading a little bit of help his way. I'm not seeing the easy opportunities that he's blowing. Do you think he's just playing too slow?
I think that's it. And you saw it in game one. He would get the screen onto Garland and he'd be out wide on him. And he would just start too far from the basket where a guy's able to get there and meet him there in a help position when he gets there. And, at that point, he's either kicking it out or taking a really tough shot in traffic. He's taking very difficult shots right now. And yes, like you said, you credit the Cavs defense for that. But this is, what are we talking? 5 games through that first round, 2 games into this round. where he just hasn't been able to get his shot off. And I know you probably look at some of those and say, "Oh, you missed some open looks." Probably is just seeing extra attention and has to play through that. But the best guys usually figure it out at a certain point, and I know
I mean,
these are
these are
two of the
things we were
tougher.
saying about Donovan Mitchell a couple games into round one, where he had
Right.
a brutal Knicks series, and it was starting off kind of quiet against Orlando, and you're like, "Hey, where's our star performance?" So I think
No,
Cavs
and
fans
these are
can
tough
relate to that.
defenses. Yeah, these are tough defenses. I thought the Heat going into the playoffs were playing some of the best defense in the league. The Cavs, they strategically and just with personnel are at the highest level. And you mentioned the Magic there. They're right up there too with all these teams. So they're going to cause you to look like that. And I agree with the people who defended Tatum and said he's doing other stuff. He's on the boards. He's defending. He's passing well. He's limiting turnovers too, which I think is really the big thing. He still only had one in this last game right here, but the shooting struggles are just so enormous. He's down to 40% from the field for the playoffs, 26 from three. And the big one in this one is that he couldn't get to the free throw line in the second half. And this is the point, I think, where you said, all right, up until now, the other stuff was making up for it. But game two, it just wasn't good enough from him. And this is the conversation we have a lot of times with these series. The best player in it usually wins. And through two games, who do you feel like has been the best player in this series?
I mean, it's got to be Donnie, right? I mean, he's been unbelievable. I think he is. I mean, even in game one, which obviously got blown off the rails. I mean, I think it's some combination of Donovan, Derek White, and Jalen Brown. The Jalen didn't have a very good game either. Um, uh, so like I don't. I guess it's Donovan in a 1-1 series. But I don't know. The Tatum thing is just interesting. I do think he does have that tendency to load up, and like that's just the Cavs just love it. When you jab step 3 times, like
There
that's
was
their
one
dream.
possession where he
Yeah,
was just digging into a guy. I forget who was defending him,
I think it
but
was
he just
Max. I think I know because he really wanted to eat against Max, and Max was not giving much quarter.
you got to keep the ball moving. You got to keep it popping. You got to put this team in rotation a little bit and just get those extra passing layers off. I thought game one, they had some really nice 3-4 pass possessions, where you get guys involved, get to some open looks.
Even
And,
early
if
in
you're
this,
going to load up,
even early in game two, I thought, I thought they did a really nice job. And again, this kind of goes back to that kind of game plan discipline from the Cavs. But like, that first set of the game, I thought was actually really clever for Missoula. And honestly, I was, as Cavs fan Carter over here, was kind of panicking because basically they had Horford on the opposite side of the floor, so Mobley couldn't come help, and they just had Derek White set up kind of a pin down screen for a post catch for Tatum, and you just have no size on the floor for the Cavs right now. And he got a deep, deep catch and drew a foul right away. And it was like, I don't know what we're going to do about that. And then they just kind of stopped trying that stuff. They stopped putting, obviously the Cornet minutes, you can't do that as much. But like with Horford, I felt like they stopped pulling Mobley out of the action and making the Cavs play 4v4 because
right.
I think Boston has such a positional size advantage in those 4v4 matchups, especially when the two small guards are out there. And so I think that's a scab they can kind of go back to picking is like because the Cavs just don't have any power forwards right now. Obviously, Dean Wade really changes the calculus there, but Marcus Morris hasn't been good enough. Niang's been, had an absolutely brutal postseason. And like for the most part, Max Strus and Isaac Okoro are your power forwards, and I think Boston needs to be able to exploit that on the other end in terms of being a little clever with how they attack. I think just attacking those guys straight up doesn't really do much for you, but these guard screens. And by the way, another person who gets a lot of credit is Darius Garland, who in game one, they tried to put him in action and it worked. In game two, he did a great job of showing and staying connected and not giving Derek White those wide open slip screen threes. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how much of that game was Boston just going away from what worked for them and how much of it was the Cavs really taking it away. But I actually had a question for you, if I may bogart your podcast a little bit.
Let's do it.
What do you think about Horford on Okoro instead of Mobley? Do you think that's really yielding the dividends that they hoped it would?
No. I think you need to shut Mobley out of this series, and Horford has done a great job of that throughout their matchups over the years. I look going into the series and, I know it's not always the best data, but Mobley was 4 for 11 in his career against Horford coming into the series, and, the one that especially, rings most recent of the course was the 22-point comeback game, and I think he started 2 for 8 in that one before he hurt his ankle. So you gotta lean on that, and Horford's important right now. You start to see in this game the Porzingis loss and the difference he makes compared to the older Celtics teams where it's like, oh, if the three's not there, they're not the same. And, you can load up against Tatum and the spacing's not as good. They miss Porzingis right now. And they didn't do those first 2 games without him. In this spot where, Horford's not as much of a rim protector and you try to use him in that role, doesn't really work. The pick and roll coverage is a little off there. They didn't utilize him great on that end, obviously. And then on offense, like you said, they're going to him early. They're finding him for the open threes. I love that play where Mobley's a little late to close out and Horford just kind of up fakes him and goes right by him for the finish early. He was so great early in this game. And like you said, they got away from that. So you have to find ways to weaponize your front court a little bit and at least make them a threat. And that's going to help the Browns and Tatums of the world. But this is the problem with your depth right now at that center spot is that Horford, he's still amazing. It's amazing what he's doing at this age. But the one area where he's probably regressed the most is being able to do that heavy lifting offensively. Like, can you go to him for 8, 9, 10 threes? Can you go to him in the post against mismatches? Those are things he's going to have to do if the Cavs are just kind of ignoring him, shying away from him, daring him to beat them. And right now, at this stage in his career, he's been more of like a, 8, 9, 10 point per game kind of guy and like 4, 5, 6 shot kind of guy. And that's just not enough of a threat right now. The Cavs are going to live with that.
Yeah, I think they'll certainly live with what he's doing in the offense. I just find him on Okoro to be kind of a waste of resources, to be honest. Like
Right.
because Okoro, I think one, it just even though Okoro isn't a great shooter, he's having to guard him like he's a wing, so he's taking that extra step out to the corner anyway.
Okoro is beating them a little bit
Yeah,
right now, isn't
yeah,
he?
he's kept them in games early on, and then what else Okoro does really well is run the damn floor. So Al's having to hoof it back and try to match up and not have to cross match. I just don't think they're getting much out of it, and the Cavs are doing so well at the rim right now, like because their rim protectors when Horford is out guarding on the perimeter are Tatum and Brown, and that's just you kind of give up your positional size advantage when you do that. You're downshifting kind of for no reason.
Yeah, and there's a lack of aggressiveness with the Celtics scheming on defense
I
that
just think it's
frustrates
too
me
cute.
sometimes.
They're getting too cute.
And they've done it in spots. They were the number 2 defense during the year. I think they take a real analytical approach to it. And it was one of the advantages I thought they had going into the series because the Cavs don't really shoot mid-rangers. That surprised me coming in. Is that they just don't go to that spot. And so you want to drop back Horford. You want to drop him off in Okoro and just kind of ignore him and have him be at the rim. That makes some sense analytically, but then you're getting Okoro stepping into those shots. You're not having Horford as involved in some of the actions. And the Cavs are just basically bringing offense to the Celtics. That was another thing they talked a lot about after game 1 was, we only had 95 points, but we only turned the ball over like 5 times in that first game. The Celtics just aren't disrupting them right now. And I feel like in this game especially, I said this a lot after it, if the Celtics just defended with some real force and, met their potential on that end of the floor, they still might have lost this game, but it would have been close. This should have never been a blowout. The
No,
Celtics, with the talent they have, shouldn't be getting blown out like this. And that was
no.
a defensive issue, I felt like, in this game. But they always point to the offense. It's always the spacing and the way they set up their defense on offense. And that's just kind of the mindset Joe has. And that's sometimes where I've been a little bit critical of him and his approach.
Yeah, and to your point about that forcefulness, I really do think that the Cavs guards are like, oh, thank God Jalen Suggs isn't here anymore.
Right.
Like
And that shouldn't be the case when you're going against Derek White and Drew
I just
Holiday.
think it's a different brand of soda, like those guys they're physical, but they're not. I feel like they use their physicality differently, like I
The
feel like
Magic
they're
fouled more than anyone in the league,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And like Derek White is like a cobra, waiting. He's just constantly springing ready to strike to block your jumper. And Drew, I think, is much more of a bully at this stage of his career in terms of
Right.
you try to go into his chest and he doesn't move, whereas Suggs was bringing the fight to Garland and to Donovan and making them back up and challenging their dribble. Like I haven't really seen them challenge either of these Celtics guards really challenge the Cavs ball handling.
I think a lot of
And
that scheming.
yeah, and I think part of it is that deep drop coverage where, I think Orlando was much more comfortable playing at the level or even switching. That those drops are deep, man. They're sometimes underneath the free throw line.
And
And
it's
like,
different when it's Horford doing it versus Porzingis, you know?
yeah, so you have to like they have to like play a little bit more fundamentally, I think, within that scheme. I will say this, dude. I think if I'm a Celtics fan, the thing that would freak me out the most is that they were so lost trying to contain the guards in game 2 that they went to those hard traps. Like that felt like living on one end of the spectrum and then just flying to the other side. And the Cavs have been begging to get two on the ball in these last two playoff series they've had, so they can get teams into rotation and let their shooters actually get open shots. And what happened as soon as they started trapping? They found Strus in the corner for 2 threes. Like that felt like a way too wide of a swing. And I wonder if that's what they're going to come out doing in game 3, or if they're going to try to middle it.
Yeah, and that goes back to the Mobley point. When he's that comfortable early and he gets the ball that many times early, he's ready to beat you out of those kind of sets. So it all just worked for the Cavs in this one. And, that leads to our next question here. But I do want to shout out our sponsor here before we continue, Prize Picks. It's a big time for Prize Picks. We got Caitlin Clark's debut coming up on Tuesday. And right now, they are offering more than 0.5 points. I think she's going to get it. I think she's going to put up 1 point in that game. So go over there. You can add that to any one of your daily fantasy sports teams that you build over here right now. Of course, there are daily fantasy sports partner here at CLNS Media and the Garden Report. Use the code CLNS. Get a 100% deposit match up to $100. What is it? You just pick 2 guys or girls
Or gals.
and build your team. You can cross sports, cross leagues, different stats. You got points, assists, rebounds. Hockey's going on right now, baseball as well. You just pick more or less on those projections. And it's been fun to see these projections for this Celtics Cavs series. They have Tatum at 27.5 points every time. And it's just like, way he's looking right now, just go less. But he's going to break out of that eventually. So it's the kind of thing you have to play with here. We had Pritchard more and White less last game, which worked. So go check it out. Go use the code CLNS to support us. Get that deposit match. Again, Prize Picks, our official daily fantasy sports partner here at the Garden Report. So this is the big question right now, Carter. Is this a series?
I think it's a series until the Celtics prove otherwise. At this point, I think to some extent, the pressure. Well, actually, I might contradict my own take there, because the pressure. I do think the Cavs have to go win Game 3. Because if the Celtics come out and win Game 3 by 20, I think all the talk of the last 24 hours kind of just washes away, and we go, oh, okay, they just had a bad game. But if the Cavs come out and take care of business at home, and Cleveland's going to be so loud. Paolo
I'm excited to
Banchero,
see it.
yeah, Paolo Banchero noted after the series that the crowd really was a factor in terms of their experience, which I appreciated that level of honesty, by the way, for a first time playoff appearance out of Mr. Banchero. But like I just thought I think this crowd is going to be ravenous. People like playing against Boston. That's just the truth of it. They they love the idea of beating Boston. It's going to
They
get
were chanting, "We want Boston," right? Right after the Heat
yeah,
game
they
too.
were. So they're this crowd really is going to come loud. And if the Cavs, take a series lead, then it is most certainly a series. Um, but if Boston kind of takes over, I think everyone, and probably including me a little bit, are going to sink back into the okay. Well, that was a really fun game, but you're going up against a great, great team, and this Cavs team just isn't whole.
It's actually a good time. I hate to stack reads, but you're hyping up game 3. You want tickets? Go over to Game Time. Get $20 off your first purchase. We're well endowed with sponsors here, Carter. The Game Time app, it's the best way to get tickets right up into and almost after tip off too. Sometimes the best deals are right after tip off over on the Game Time app. That's what makes it great. Used it even before they've partnered with us here. They're offering $20 off your first purchase with the code CLNS. Get $20 off. Just download the app and use that code. Terms apply, of course. And if you're traveling to Cleveland, or even there's going to be a game 5 now next Wednesday. So go check it out over there. Download it. Use that code CLNS and get yourself some tickets to this series. Shout out to them. Great sponsor over at the Game Time app. So it is going to be a raucous environment. It is going to be fun. I'm excited to go, Carter. What's the experience like there?
I mean, a playoff crowd in Cleveland is really, really fun. Obviously, you have the natural stuff that's going to come. You're going to have the screaming. You're going to have people, yelling at the refs and all that stuff. But I will say something I really love about going to Cavs games, especially in the postseason, is it is a ball-knowing crowd. I always think about in one of the play-in games a couple years ago. Karras fought off like John Collins for a deep post up for like 10 seconds. Collins got a seal. Karras pushed him out and really worked his ass off and kind of blew up what was going to be a really good opportunity. Got a standing ovation from the Cavs crowd, even though like there wasn't an action on the play. It was just like the crowd saw a guy working hard to dig out of a bad spot, and they wanted to give him that kind of love. So like it's a ball knowing crowd. It's a loud, loud, loud crowd. I couldn't believe how loud it was in the Orlando series. I kind of expected a bit of a sleepy group, compared to like going and playing the Knicks, a glamour franchise, like the vibes were rough at the end of the year. So I was like, is it going to be a bit of a kind of a withdrawn environment in Cleveland? And it was not. It was so loud I couldn't hear the whistle like 5 or 6 times in games 1 and 2 of that series. So I think it's going to be a really, really fun one. And, it's just going to be a matter of like, are you going to get that kind of performance out of the guards again? Because they go as they go, the Cleveland Cavaliers go most of the time.
Yeah, and they went 4-0, of course, in that series at home. So they're going to continue to defend that here. You mentioned the guards, and back to the question I asked that started this conversation. I do think it's a series now, just because when you look at the health, when you look at what the Cavs could potentially gain down the line here, it doesn't look great with Allen. I didn't see
No.
him at shoot around at all. Just seems like he's really hurt. So I just can't imagine that happening anytime soon. Maybe at some point down the line in this series, but you do have the hope of that coming potentially for the Cavs here. I just don't think Porzingis will be back in this series at all, just based on the timeline. And then you got Wade, who he's on the court, he's starting to do a little bit more. He's a guy that can really help them here. And then you
Yeah.
mentioned the guards, like they're looking good. Like I had some worry about Mitchell coming into the series because he looked banged up in round 1. He didn't look like himself. He shot 25% from 3, and he's just been incredible. And what impresses me most, obviously, there's a lot of talk around him right now. His future looms, once the season ends, and they were pretty close, to seeing their season end in that round 1. But he just seems locked in. And it seems like he's still dedicated to the cause here. Seems like he still believes in what's going on here. And how much does that mean long-term beyond this year? I don't know. But at least for this moment, it has the Cavs locked into the series and involved. That was a great moment at the end of the third last night where he hit that shot, turned around, and he actually found like a Cavs fan right in front of him. And the guy had his hand out. And I don't think he knew at first that it was a Cavs fan. And he was like, oh, boom. But he's been
Yeah.
great.
He's been really cool. I mean, I think him building up Darius Garland in Game 7 on the bench after Darius is just having this nightmare kind of first half, and seeing him, like completely enveloping him on the bench, trying to build him up, was one of my favorite moments, uh, you know, of this era, to be frank. And then when Darius hits that backbreaker three to kind of put them up double digits in that game, it was the most genuine, like, brotherly hug I've ever seen between two players on a team I've rooted for. Like, you could just tell he was so rooting for his guy in that moment. And like, I won't pretend to know Donovan Mitchell's heart. I don't know what he wants to do long term, or if this is if this is not really his long term future or not. I don't know, but like, one thing I think I do know wholesale about him is, like, I just don't think this dude is going to be like one of those quiet quitters, where like, oh, things aren't going great, so I'm going to start distancing myself a little bit.
Right.
Like, no, he's been bought in wholesale, and that tells me that he's a guy who, no matter what his like professional ambitions are, and I think that should always be somewhat church and state separate from, how you feel about the court, but no matter what his professional ambitions are, like, when he's here to work, he's here to work. When he's with the group he's with, he's there to lift them up. First thing he does post game last night was shout out Evan Mobley, and kind of try to celebrate him. So I think he's been an unbelievable leader for this team through this postseason so far, that has had some real ups and downs. And like, I'm really glad to have someone like Donovan both on the floor and off the floor.
Yeah, and shout out to Mobley. I didn't know he had that in him, what he showed
Yeah.
last night. I just thought he was gonna continue to struggle in this series. It's been a bad matchup for him. It didn't seem like they could get him the ball in his spots. And, I know talking to Justin before this series, he prefers him at the 4 a little bit more. But he was just awesome in this game. And again, I go back to that game plan of empowering him early. It was so clear that's what they were trying to do.
Well, he got like a
That was
running
big.
start in the fourth too.
Yeah,
He had a
after a couple
brutal first three
fouls.
quarters, then had 10 points in the fourth quarter, and then I just felt like he kind of used that momentum to
It's a good point. Yeah, in
launch into
game
game
1.
two.
And then, he hits the foul trouble in the third quarter of this one, and Tristan picked them up, which was huge too. Those are some important Tristan minutes there, and
Bobby,
he was happy about that.
there's death, taxes, and Tristan Thompson dominating Al Horford's team in the postseason.
I didn't think I'd see it in 2024, but there he is.
There's been a long running history of Tristan Thompson as Al Horford's father jokes in Cleveland, literally coming up on a decade of those kinds of jokes. Obviously, jokes aside, super cool to see Tristan just keep them alive in that stretch. They were +3 in the 5 minutes to end that third, and I thought in a lot of ways that kind of settled the game.
Yeah, tough moment for my guy Luke, who was so good in game 1.
Yeah, he was
Uh,
amazing.
So I have a tough read on this because you're right. The Celtics might just come out and blast the Cavs in game 3. Everyone forgets this game. It's what happened in round 1. This does feel a little different to me. I had 5 games. I thought with some health, the Cavs could push to 6. And it's looking like straight up, especially without Porzingis in there, they might be able to push it 6, especially with these 2 home games ahead here now. And that's actually where I'm kind of leaning on this one. I do think this series will go a little longer than people think, just because I think the Cavs, I have a lot of respect for them and, what they're able to do in this series and the defense and everything else here. But game 2 might have been more about the Celtics and just that letdown. And, this is a question I keep asking everybody right now, because sometimes I just feel a little skeptical on it myself. And it feels good to see Denver in this hole now, because I feel like they're probably the toughest matchup for the Celtics that they could see on their way to a title path here. But Minnesota, like, they're the highest form of that defensive, physical, big team, and the Celtics saw it in round 1. They're seeing it again here in round 2. They might have to go through the Knicks in round 3, who are kind of in that mold now too. I don't know. Does it feel like the Celtics are a championship team to you when you watch them, when you just kind of consume what they do?
I think I think their thing that's always going to be weird is that, and I don't know if your fans, if your listeners will like get grumpy at me for saying this, but like, I just think they're so hard to parse because they're a historically good team without a top 5 player. And like, I don't know what that means, and like, And like even if you have Tatum top 5, like which I think is defensible, like I think everyone agrees there's like a tier between him and like Jokic and Giannis, at
There's
least
an
for the most part.
inconsistency factor with him too, because 'cause he'll get to that level, and then he'll have stretches like this where the shot's not falling, and you're like, "Who is he?" And that's like, I can't believe we're still asking that because he's a little bit of a way into his career here, but who is he? I was
Yeah.
talking with Justin about this earlier, like, is he the passing, rebounding, defense, do it all guy? Is he the big scorer like Kobe, as the comparison often goes? Is he Durant, who can just get his shot off from anywhere and hits a bunch of, mid-rangers? They haven't really allowed him to be that.
You know who
So
he
that's
might be is Paul Pierce. Like,
I don't think he's
like that.
Pierce either, because like, you see him at the end of these games, that was Pierce's thing is he would just
Yeah.
steal games at the end, and this was a tough year for Tatum in the clutch. He's under a microscope unlike anybody in the league right now, and I don't know if it's because he's on the Celtics
Because
or
he's on a
just this level of
historically great he's the
expectations,
best
and yeah,
player on a historically great team,
right.
and like he's probably the difference between this being because the reality is, let's say he is a top 3 player. Like if he were in that Jokic, Giannis kind of tier, Luka tier, I think everyone would be like, no shot the Celtics don't win the title.
Yeah.
And because he's not, everyone's like, can he get there? Can he do it? Can he get them there? And it's going to be a really interesting kind of thing to see. I mean, this Cavs team is kind of tailor made to bother him and make it hard on him. And I think you're gonna he's gonna have a lot of things to learn from coming out of the series, which is to his credit something he does. Like I'll say this as someone who doesn't watch as many Celtics games as you or your listener base. Every time I do watch the Boston Celtics, I go, man, those guys are all working really hard at getting better.
Right.
Tatum's footwork is especially in the kind of the mid post and when he attacks and catch it, attacks right off the catch. I'm like, man, he does some stuff that he was not doing 2 years ago. Same with Jaylen Brown. Like those two have gotten better and better and better incrementally year over year over year. And I imagine being a Celtics fan, sometimes it's hard to see that stuff because it's like you're just so in it. But like as someone who parachutes into watching the Celtics, I'm like, those guys are getting better. It's just, there's just levels to this. And he might not be where you want him to be. But the cool thing is your team's so good that might not stop you from winning a championship anyway.
Right, and he can lean on the other guys sometimes. I think that's perfectly fine. Game 1 was a perfectly fine way to go about it. If he's not gonna shoot well, if the stats aren't there, rely on the other guys, set them up. I think he's done a much better job with that, along with all the stuff you mentioned. Like, his passing is just kinda increased year by year, and I think he reads the game well, and I think he can be patient and make, the right passes against pressure, the team tries to throw at him, and that might just have to be what he does the whole way, and if he finishes the playoffs and he's raising the trophy, shooting 40% and 30 from 3, but he does all these other little things, I don't think anyone's gonna care at that point. Like,
It'll look a
that's the
lot
good
like his
thing
idol Kobe in that capacity.
that's the good thing about him is he does have something he can go to in different spots, and when he gets knocked in this MVP race, that's where I do defend him a little bit because, like, Brunson can't defend like him,
No.
and Luka can't either, and, most of those guys aren't the rebounders that he is, and he can just play a little bit of everything, but you do end up in that territory where, like, you can do it all, but you're a master of none, and,
Yeah.
he is a high level scorer.
He is a sum of his parts superstar.
Right.
But
That's exactly who he is.
basketball isn't about being the sum of your parts, and that's what makes it complicated.
I can't wait to see how this series goes. I think we're at, like, an inflection point right here,
Oh
and it's either
yeah.
gonna be Celtics just roll the rest of the way, or we're in for a surprisingly tough series here in round 2, which is how it should be. The Cavs, Celtics, they play a game 3 at a nice 8:40 PM start time that I'm sure Carter's thrilled about.
I'm gonna be so tired Sunday morning. It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine, it's Saturday. I'm excited to see Cleveland. Got some tips from Carter. I'm gonna check everything out there and, enjoy my 3 nights there. So, I'm off tomorrow, heading that way, shoot around coverage, check us out in the morning. Check us out post-game as always here on the Garden Report. We'll have coverage, and we, of course, brought to you by our final sponsor here, PXG, great golf wear, great, leisure wear for the spring. It's starting to warm up. You want to get this, go over there, check it out, pxg.com/Garden Report. Get a 10% discount on your first purchase over there. It's great for on and off the course. Great light material, hats, anything you need for the course. PXG, you know them for their clubs and all the rest. Know them for their leisure wear and stuff to wear on the course as well. pxg.com/Garden Report. He's Carter Rodriguez. Check them on the Chase Down podcast. When you guys going live again?
We'll be live tomorrow night after the game.
All right. You got both sides there then. Check us both out. Carter, thanks so much for being here. Enjoy the game tomorrow, and maybe we'll talk sometime later in the series.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you having me on.